Deepak asked me to very briefly summarize to you the key ideas of a book I recently published with the cheeky title of Why Materialism is Baloney. And I'll summarize that to you briefly, no slides, no charts, because the core idea of the book, the essence of the book, is as simple as it is heretic in our current worldview. And the idea is this: I claim that reality is exactly what it seems to be, that it has colors, that it has flavors, that it has melody, that it has qualities, and that those colors, flavors, melodies, qualities are really outside your head. They really exist in the world. You might say, well, why is this heretic, right? It is heretic because the mainstream view in our culture today is that it is your brain that generates all of your subjective experiences. All colors, all melodies, all textures, flavors, they all unfold, are generated and exist within your skull. Your real skull, supposedly, is somewhere beyond this room, enveloping this room from all sides. That is the mainstream materialist or physicalist view of our culture. Now, you might say, this is crazy. Why did we come to a conclusion like this? Well, it is not as crazy as it sounds. I don't want to short sell physicalism either. This is an inference that comes from two problems that people think they can only solve by postulating an abstract world outside consciousness and the brain generating consciousness. And these are the two problems. Number one, we don't seem to be able to control reality at will just by changing our thoughts or wishes about it like we can control our fantasies. Reality seems to be fundamentally independent of our volition. Therefore, it should be outside mind. That's the first inference. The second inference is, if everything is conscious experience, if everything has qualities, then how come we seem to be all sharing the same dream, the same world? Because if all is a dream, it should be an individual dream. We are separate people, but we seem to share the same world. So materialists will infer that there is an abstract world, devoid of all qualities, akin to a set of mathematical equations, pure quantities, which stimulate your brain through your sense organs, and your brain then creates subjective experience inside your skull, modulated by this external, abstract, purely quantitative stimuli. That is the rationale of this worldview. I think these two motivations are illusory. We don't need to make these two inferences. And I dare to offer you an alternative explanation, or two alternative explanations, one for each, which are summarized in the book. I think the first confusion behind the materialist, the physicalist worldview is to mistake a reality outside the control of volition for a reality fundamentally outside consciousness itself. These two things are not the same. We all experience mental activity, psychic activity that is subjective and yet falls completely outside our volition. Your nightmares. If you had control over your nightmares, you would never have them. You would never have a nightmare. Your nightmares are the result of mental activity, subjective activity in consciousness that is entire outside of your volition. Schizophrenic hallucinations, the same thing. They fall outside the control of the volition of the person. And they can unfold in a very continuous, self-consistent way for years at a time, as anyone who has seen that movie, A Beautiful Mind, would be able to attest. The second error, I think, is what we call in philosophy the fallacy of begging the question, which is a sophisticated name for circular reasoning. The idea that there needs to be an external world to justify the fact that we share the same reality is entirely based on the notion that because our bodies are separate in the fabric of space-time, then our psyches should also be separate. Therefore, we can only share a dream if this dream is generated by a reality outside us that we can both observe concurrently. This is circular reasoning because it assumes that consciousness is in the body. So if bodies are separate, consciousnesses or psyches should be also separate. Well, this is precisely the point in contention. You cannot argue for this point by assuming it in the first place. That's circular reasoning. If all reality is in consciousness, in other words, if reality really has qualities, colors, melodies, flavors, then obviously it is the body-brain system that is in consciousness, not consciousness in the body-brain system. Therefore, the fact that our bodies are separate in the fabric of consciousness does not mean that our psyches, our minds, are fundamentally separate. The fact that we seem to experience reality centered in the locus of our body does not mean either that consciousness is in the body. We all have examples of this that we experience ourselves. When you dream, you have a dreamed-up body. You experience the dream centered in that body, through that body. Yet, obviously, your dream body is in your consciousness, your dreaming consciousness, not your consciousness in your dreamed-up body. You see, if reality is in consciousness, there is nothing preventing the hypothesis, which is very reasonable and non-inflationary, that there is a segment of our psyches, an obfuscated segment of our psyches, like the segment that generates our nightly dreams, which is common to us all. Like the roots of a tree, it's like the branches of a tree, the separate branches of a tree unify at the roots. Maybe our psyches unify at its deepest, most obfuscated, quote-unquote, unconscious level. Unconscious is a misnomer. I would call it obfuscated consciousness. And it is that collective obfuscated segment of our psyches that generates the dream we call consensus reality. This avoids the postulate of an abstract, unprovable world fundamentally outside conscious experience, a world of quantities and abstractions, a world that nobody can ever prove, and which actually creates more serious problems than the explanations it offers. Namely, it creates the hard problem of consciousness, which is our futile attempt to explain how consciousness can come out of an abstraction of consciousness, a problem we will never resolve. You see, if our bodies are in consciousness, our bodies cannot create it. Yet the fact that brain activity correlates with consciousness, subjective experience, can easily be made sense of. Everything you experience are images of processes in consciousness. Lightning, is the image of atmospheric electric discharge. Like flames are the image of combustion. Flames don't generate combustion. They are just the way combustion looks from the outside. Lightning doesn't generate atmospheric electric discharge. It's just the way atmospheric electric discharge looks from the outside. I say that your brain and the brain activity is the image of a process of localization in the broader stream of mind that we call the world, the universe. The brain doesn't generate consciousness for exactly the same reason that lightning doesn't generate atmospheric electric discharge. It is the outside view of your conscious processes. And of course, it correlates with subjective experience, because it's the image of it. It conveys relevant information about it. I will conclude by leaving you with a metaphor I talked about last night. If all reality is the stream of consciousness, the flow of subjective experience, I think the brain, the body as a whole, is like a whirlpool in that stream. It's the image of a localization process in the broader stream of consciousness. The brain doesn't generate consciousness for exactly the same reason that a whirlpool doesn't generate water. And the dilemma of neuroscience today is to try to explain how the whirlpool generates water, which is an insoluble problem. It will never be resolved. I'll leave you with these ideas for considering further. And if you'd like to have my book signed, I'll be standing outside during lunch at Barbara's bookstore.
I wrote a book of fiction about 2 years ago. It's called God, A Story of Revelation. And it tracks the history of God from the Old Testament right to Einstein. And the idea came to me because I read in the New York Times an article that was published in the year 1930, before the war broke out, where Einstein met the Indian poet Tagore in Potsdam, in Germany. Tagore was a Nobel laureate. He had won the Nobel Prize in the year 1928, I believe. Einstein had won it before. And so Einstein invited Tagore to his home to meet him. And when Tagore entered his home, Einstein quoted a poem that Tagore had written, and that poem is beautiful. It's the same stream of life that runs through my veins, runs through the world and dances in rhythmic measure. And he quoted the whole poem. And Tagore responded by saying, Dr. Einstein, Herr Einstein, I would quote you, but it would all be numbers. And that's how the conversation started. But the gist of the argument was what you're talking about. Einstein, as we heard yesterday, was a realist. But realist, as defined in physics, is an observer-independent real world, which is actually a metaphysical idea and not a scientific idea. But he was a realist in those terms. And the argument basically centered around, is the cosmos we observe is what it is, or an experience in human consciousness? And they argued about it, and finally Einstein semi-conceded. But that argument is still going on. What we are saying is the scientific universe is the universe of the scientific human being. It's not absolute.
Absolutely. A lot of science today is, well, it is perfectly fair that science be largely dependent on inferences. The problem is when you start making metaphysical inferences in science. My idealistic view of science is that it is a methodology for studying the patterns and regularities of nature. Very valuable, very important in that sense. But when you load those models, those patterns and regularities with a metaphysical interpretation, that's philosophy. That's no longer science. And it may limit the scope of science in the sense that it precludes you from exploring certain avenues that you a priori consider impossible.
Bernardo Kastrup, thank you.
Thank you.